Welcome back, fellow Cosmic Curious, to the Space and Astronomy podcast. This is your gateway to understanding the universe, from the farthest stars right down to the deepest questions within ourselves. I'm your host, and today, oh boy, we're embarking on a deep dive that's maybe less about distant galaxies and more about the very fabric of existence itself. We are tackling one of the most profound and frankly pretty mind-bending questions out there in science and philosophy. Is the universe conscious?
It's a huge question. It feels almost too big to even grasp properly, doesn't it? But it's genuinely stirring up some fascinating debates and actually gaining traction in fields you might not initially expect.
Right. Not just philosophy anymore.
Not at all. So today we're going to venture into some surprising territory. We'll look at panpsychism.
Panpsychism, okay.
We'll explore the really enigmatic link or potential link between quantum mechanics and awareness. And ultimately, we're going to grapple with this truly audacious idea of universal consciousness.
Okay, audacious is definitely the word. So as you embark on this deep dive with us, maybe, take a moment, a deep breath perhaps, because this is going to challenge some really fundamental assumptions we all hold.
It certainly might.
All right, let's start unpacking this then, because look, before we can even begin to ask if the universe itself has a mind, we really need to confront a more fundamental question, right? And it sounds simple, but it's not. What is consciousness?
Exactly. It's a term we use constantly. We experience it, every waking moment. But despite all our incredible advancements, neuroscience mapping the brain, psychology understanding behavior, even AI getting spookily sophisticated.
Yeah, AI is moving fast.
Incredibly fast. But we still don't truly understand where consciousness comes from or what its fundamental nature really is. We can watch the brain light up on scans.
And the neurons firing.
Observe those intricate patterns, track the chemical flows. But we haven't been able to bridge that ultimate gap, that chasm, really.
And you've absolutely hit the nail on the head there. This is precisely what a lot of scientists and philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness.
The hard problem.
Right.
And let's be clear, there are what they sometimes call the easy problems, though they're anything but easy.
Still incredibly difficult, yeah.
Absolutely. Things like, how does the brain process sensory information? Light hits your retina, how does that become the image you see? Or how do neural networks let us recognize faces, or form memories, or learn a language? Those are massive computational and biological challenges. We're making progress there.
Okay, so those are the easy problems, relatively speaking. What makes the hard problem hard?
The hard problem is different. It's distinct and honestly far more perplexing. It's about that inexplicable leap, that jump from the purely physical processes.
Like the neurons firing, the chemicals, the electrical signal.
Right? All that physical stuff happening in the brain.
Yeah.
How do you get from that to subjective lived experience? Why does it feel like something to be you, sitting there listening to us talk right now?
Yeah, why isn't it just dark inside, like a computer running its code?
Precisely. Why isn't it just a very sophisticated biological machine running incredibly complex computations, but one that's just processing? Why does it possess this inner private world, a world of sensations, the redness of red, the warmth of the sun, thoughts, emotions, that sense of personal awareness, that feeling of being aware?
That qualitative aspect. Qualia, is that the term?
Qualia, exactly. That's the technical term for the subjective quality of experience, what it's like, cariness. That's the core of this really profound mystery. We can explain increasingly well how the brain works on a mechanical level, but we cannot explain why it gives rise to experience, why all that processing should feel like anything at all from the inside.
And it's that very profound mystery, isn't it? That stubborn lack, that gap in our scientific explanation. That's what cracks open the door to these much, much bigger questions.
It really does. It
Yeah.
forces us to wonder.
Because, okay, if we can't fully explain consciousness purely as something that just emerges from complex brains,
Yeah.
like wetness emerging from H2O molecules, but somehow much more mysterious, if it's not just an emergent property of purely unconscious matter, then what if our whole starting point is wrong?
What if the fundamental assumption needs rethinking?
Exactly. What if consciousness isn't just a fancy byproduct of biological complexity, something that pops into existence when brains get complicated enough? What if it's something more fundamental, more basic?
Basic ingredient of the universe.
Yeah. What if it's an intrinsic feature woven right into the fabric of the universe itself? From the tiniest particles all the way up to the largest structures we see in the cosmos.
It's a truly radical thought. It feels almost science fiction-y at first.
It does. It compels us to look way beyond our usual frameworks, doesn't it? And maybe, just maybe, rethink reality right from the ground up.
And that fundamental rethinking, that willingness to question the very base layer of reality, that leads us directly into our next big idea, panpsychism.
Ah, panpsychism. Okay, let's unpack that word first because it sounds ancient, doesn't it? Almost mystical.
It does have that feel. And the roots are Greek. You've got pan, meaning all, and psyche, meaning soul or mind.
So literally all mind or all soul. Okay, yeah, that sounds pretty spiritual or philosophical, maybe not like hard science.
And historically, it has deep roots in philosophy, both East and West. But the core concept, the way it's being discussed now, while definitely counterintuitive to our modern ears, is actually incredibly direct. And some argue, surprisingly elegant.
Elegant how? What's the central idea?
Okay, so panpsychism, in its modern form, suggests that consciousness isn't exclusive to complex organisms with brains and nervous systems. You know, us, maybe dogs, maybe octopuses.
Right, the usual suspects.
Instead, it posits that consciousness, or maybe better put, a primitive form of consciousness, is a property inherent in all matter, right down to its most basic elementary level, particles.
Whoa, okay. All matter. Like this desk, my microphone.
Potentially, yes. But, and this is really, really crucial, we need to be very clear about what we mean by awareness or consciousness at that level.
Right, because I'm immediately picturing my coffee cup having deep thoughts, which seems silly.
Exactly. And that's the common misconception, the immediate caricature. It's often used as a straw man argument to dismiss the whole idea. We're definitely not talking about your coffee cup contemplating the meaning of life or worrying about being empty.
Okay, good. That helps. So what kind of awareness are we talking about then?
We're talking about a primitive, maybe proto-conscious form of experience, something utterly rudimentary. It's far removed from thought, complex emotion, self-reflection, memory, planning, all the things we associate with human consciousness.
Proto-consciousness, rudimentary experience. So if I'm trying to grasp this, it's not that my coffee cup has a mind like mine, not at all. It's more like it might possess a very, very basic fundamental feeling or being in a way that's totally alien to how I experience things.
That's a much better way to think about it. Perhaps it feels its own state in some incredibly simple way. Maybe its temperature, its solidity, its interaction with the particles around it, but without any judgment or cognition or interpretation.
Like it just is warm in some experiential sense.
Possibly, or perhaps it's even simpler than that, something we can't even conceptualize. The key idea is that it's an intrinsic property. Think of it like mass or electric charge.
Ah, okay. So just like an electron has charge, maybe it also has some minuscule speck of experience. It's just part of what it is.
That's the proposal. It's about intrinsic awareness, not complex cognition. Think less mind, more fundamental experiential quality. Just as a particle has these physical properties, mass, spin, charge, maybe it also has this tiny, irreducible bit of experience or proto-consciousness.
Okay, that distinction is crucial. It moves it from sounding purely like animism or something spiritual towards a potential scientific or philosophical position.
Exactly. It's an attempt to explain how complex experience, like ours, could ever arise in the first place, by suggesting that experience in some incredibly basic form didn't exist. It was always there, fundamentally.
So it solves the hard problem by saying consciousness doesn't magically emerge from non-conscious stuff because the stuff was never truly non-conscious to begin with.
That's the core philosophical move, yes. It reframes the problem entirely.
Okay. And this is where it gets genuinely fascinating for me because while, yes, it still sounds bizarre initially, maybe even a bit spiritual. You mentioned earlier that panpsychism is actually gaining serious consideration from respected physicists, philosophers, neuroscientists. It's not just some fringe idea anymore.
No, it's definitely moving beyond the absolute fringe. It's being taken very seriously by a growing, though still minority, group of thinkers. These are people who feel that our current scientific paradigms, particularly standard physicalism or materialism, are fundamentally failing to adequately address that hard problem we talked about.
They see it as a dead end, perhaps?
Some do, yes. Or at least they see a massive explanatory gap that current theories just aren't filling. So they're looking for alternatives. You have key proponents like the philosopher Philip Goff. He argues it's actually the simplest way to integrate consciousness into our scientific worldview, given what we know about physics.
Simpler. How so?
Simpler in the sense that it doesn't require consciousness to magically poof into existence from things that have zero experiential properties. It posits experience as fundamental. Then there's Galen Strawson, another philosopher, who argues quite forcefully that panpsychism is the only truly coherent materialist view. Which sounds paradoxical, right?
Yeah, materialism usually means consciousness is not fundamental.
Right. But Strawson argues that if you're really a materialist, you have to accept that experience is real. And if experience is real and it arises from matter, then matter itself must, in some sense, be experiential. Otherwise, you're back to magic emergence.
Huh, that's a twist.
It is. And then you have David Chalmers, a really leading philosopher of mind who famously coined the term hard problem. He doesn't fully endorse panpsychism, but he takes it very seriously as a possible solution.
So these thinkers are essentially saying, look, if consciousness can't be explained as just emerging from purely unconscious matter once it gets complex enough,
Which is the standard story, but one they find lacking.
then maybe we need to flip the script entirely. Maybe we need to fundamentally rethink the building blocks. Instead of consciousness somehow emerging from matter, maybe matter has always, in some very basic form, been conscious or proto-conscious.
That's the radical pivot. Consciousness isn't something that mysteriously appears when you arrange dumb atoms in a clever way. It's a fundamental property, woven into the fabric of reality right from the get-go, alongside things like energy and space-time. This changes, well, potentially everything about how we see the universe.
It really does. The philosophical shift is huge. It's not about how dead, inert stuff suddenly sparks into life and awareness. It's asking, what if awareness, in some primitive form, is just a given? An ingredient baked into the cake from the start.
Exactly. It reframes reality. The universe isn't just a giant clockwork mechanism, a collection of inert particles bouncing off each other according to mathematical laws. Instead, there's potentially an inherent experiential quality to existence itself, even at the most fundamental level.
So the focus shifts then, from
Right.
trying to create consciousness out of non-conscious bits,
Which is the hard problem.
to understanding how these maybe ubiquitous but very primitive forms of awareness combine or integrate to form the complex consciousness we experience.
Precisely. And that's not necessarily an easy problem either. It's often called the combination problem or the integration problem.
Right. How do tiny little bits of proto-consciousness add up to my rich inner life?
Exactly. How do you get from particle-level micro-experience to macro-experience like ours? That's a huge challenge for panpsychists. But they argue it's potentially a more tractable problem than the hard problem of getting any experience from zero experience. They see it as scaling up something that's already there rather than conjuring it from nothing.
Okay, I see the logic. It's shifting the location of the mystery, perhaps.
You could say that. It posits experience as fundamental, and the mystery becomes one of complexity and combination rather than origin.
All right, so if we follow this thread, if we entertain the idea that consciousness or proto-consciousness is inherent in all matter, right down to the particles, then the next logical step, and maybe the most mind-blowing one, is to scale this whole concept up, way up.
From the micro to the macro.
From particles
Yeah.
to the entire cosmos itself. And this brings us to that truly, almost poetic, sometimes unsettling idea of a cosmic mind.
Indeed. And again, like with a coffee cup, we need to be careful with the terminology here. When proponents talk about a cosmic mind, they're generally not referring to, say, an old man with a beard sitting on a cloud.
Not an anthropomorphic deity? Okay.
No, not necessarily a personal thinking entity with intentions and emotions like ours. That's imposing our specific kind of consciousness onto the universe. Instead, it's typically envisioned as something much more abstract. A vast, maybe diffuse kind of awareness arising from the very fabric of space and time itself.
So how would that even work? If we accept the panpsychist starting point, every particle has a tiny sliver of proto-consciousness.
Which is a big if, of course.
A huge if, yes. But if we grant it for the sake of argument, how does that scale up to the universe? Is it just the sum of all the parts?
Well, the thinking often goes like this. Just as those hypothesized slivers of proto-consciousness somehow combine and integrate in incredibly complex ways within a human brain.
With its billions of neurons, trillions of connections.
Exactly. Leading to our rich, unified conscious experience. Perhaps, just perhaps, a similar process or an analogous one could occur at the cosmic scale. It's definitely a speculative leap, a big one. But it flows somewhat naturally if you accept that underlying panpsychist premise that consciousness is fundamental and combinable.
So you've got these countless trillions upon trillions of proto-conscious particles. And they aren't just floating randomly, they aggregate, right? They form structures.
Immense structures. Stars, planets, gas clouds, galaxies, black holes, and even larger structures like galaxy clusters and superclusters, all interconnected by this vast cosmic web.
The cosmic web, yeah. Those filamentary structures.
Right, so the question becomes, could consciousness then emerge or integrate or manifest at that incredibly grand scale? Could the universe itself, as a self-organizing system of interacting proto-conscious components, possess some form of distributed, unified awareness?
Wow. Distributed awareness across everything. What would that even be like? It's almost impossible to imagine.
Yeah. It likely would be impossible for us to truly comprehend, just as a single neuron probably can't comprehend the nature of human thought. But the hypothesis is there. The potential mechanism is analogous to the brain. Complex interconnectedness and information processing, but on an unimaginable scale. Imagine information, or perhaps experience, flowing along those cosmic filaments, integrating across light years.
Processing what, though? Is the universe thinking?
Again, probably not thinking in our sense. Maybe it's more about experiencing its own state, its own evolution, its own internal dynamics in some holistic way. It's a colossal leap of imagination, no doubt. But it's a consistent extension if you start from panpsychism.
And this is where that analogy comes in, the one that some theorists propose, which really grabs you visually. The universe resembling a vast neural network.
Ah, yes, that comparison.
I've seen those images side by side, and it is genuinely uncanny. You look at these incredibly detailed maps of the cosmic web.
Derived from galaxy surveys showing the large-scale structure.
Yeah, these vast filaments of galaxies and dark matter stretching across millions, even billions of light years, connecting galaxy clusters with these huge voids in between. And then you put that next to a microscopic image of the intricate branching structure of neurons within a human brain.
The dendrites, the axons, the synaptic connections.
And the resemblance is, well, like I said, it gave me chills the first time I saw it. It just looks similar, like a fractal pattern repeating at vastly different scales.
The visual and structural parallels are remarkable, aren't they? Almost startling. You have nodes, galaxy clusters of neurons, connected by filaments, cosmic web strands or axons, dendrites, forming a complex network. Now, is it just a coincidence? Maybe. Nature might just favor certain efficient networking patterns, whether it's distributing matter or transmitting signals.
That's the skeptical take, yeah, just convergent evolution of structures.
Right. But proponents of cosmic consciousness find this structural similarity highly suggestive. It makes them wonder, is there a deeper principle here? Is there some universal algorithm for self-organization, for information processing, maybe even for generating awareness that manifests both in brains and in the cosmos as a whole?
Which brings us right back to that incredibly provocative question, maybe the biggest one in this whole deep dive. Could we, as individual humans with our own complex, seemingly self-contained consciousness, could we actually be something like neurons in the mind of the cosmos?
It's a perspective shift of cosmic proportions, isn't it?
It reframes everything. Instead of us being these separate little entities looking out at a vast and different universe, we become intrinsic, functional parts of it, maybe even parts of its own awareness process.
It absolutely changes the picture. It moves us from being mere inhabitants of the universe to potentially being active, contributing components within a larger, possibly conscious system. In that view, our individual thoughts, feelings, experiences, they might not just be our private affairs. They might somehow contribute to a grander, universal awareness, like individual neurons contribute to the overall function of a single brain.
That's incredibly humbling, actually, to think of ourselves as just one tiny part of this vast, possibly living entity.
Humbling, yes, but also potentially incredibly empowering, maybe. It suggests this profound connection, a unity that transcends our individual boundaries, our sense of separateness.
It definitely challenges the anthropocentric view, right? The idea that consciousness is our special thing.
Completely. It suggests consciousness isn't unique to humans, or even to life as we know it. Instead, we might be just one localized, albeit highly complex, expression of a much, much vaster phenomenon that pervades everything.
Okay, my mind is sufficiently bent into a pretzel shape now.
We're just getting started.
Oh, good. So, if that wasn't enough, let's dive down another rabbit hole, one that comes up frequently in these kinds of discussions.
Yeah.
The quantum realm. The utterly mysterious, deeply weird world of quantum mechanics. Because some really provocative thinkers are suggesting that consciousness and quantum physics might be, like, fundamentally tangled up together.
Yes, this connection, or proposed connection, is probably one of the most controversial areas, but also one of the most endlessly fascinating. It sits right at that boundary between physics, neuroscience, and philosophy.
And there are specific theories, right? It's not just vague hand-waving.
There are. Perhaps the most well-known, though still highly debated, is the Orch-Or theory.
Orch-Or. Okay, what does that stand for?
It's short for Orchestrated Objective Reduction. It was put forth and is still championed by the very renowned mathematical physicist Sir Roger Penrose.
Nobel laureate Penrose, right?
That's the one. And the anesthesiologist and consciousness researcher Stuart Hameroff. It's a collaboration between physics and biology, essentially.
Okay, so what do Penrose and Hameroff propose? How does quantum mechanics get into the brain?
Well, their core idea is that consciousness doesn't arise from the classical sort of billiard ball interactions between neurons, the simple electrical firing that most neuroscientists focus on. Instead, they propose that it arises from quantum processes happening at a much smaller scale, deep inside the neurons, within tiny protein structures called microtubules.
Microtubules. Those are like the cell's internal scaffolding, right?
Actually, they form the cytoskeleton.
Yeah.
Penrose and Hameroff suggest these microtubules have properties that allow them to sustain delicate quantum states of quantum coherence for long enough periods, shielded from the noisy, warm, wet environment of the brain.
Which is usually thought to destroy quantum effects very quickly.
Typically, yes.
Yeah.
That's a major criticism of the theory. How can these delicate quantum states survive? But they propose mechanisms for how it might work. And crucially, they suggest that consciousness emerges specifically when these quantum states within the microtubules collapse. They undergo what Penrose calls objective reduction.
Objective reduction, meaning the quantum state collapses on its own, not necessarily due to measurement?
Precisely. Penrose argues there's a threshold related to gravity and space-time geometry, where a superposition becomes unstable and collapses into a definite state spontaneously. And Hameroff suggests this collapse is orchestrated by the microtubule structures, and that each moment of objective reduction corresponds to a moment of conscious experience, a quantum of consciousness, if you will.
Wow. Okay, so consciousness is literally happening at the quantum level, inside these tiny structures in our brain cells.
That's the Orcoar hypothesis, and they argue it explains features of consciousness that classical computation struggles with, like its non-algorithmic nature, its unity, its connection to the flow of time. It's highly speculative, heavily debated, lacks definitive proof, but it's a serious attempt to link the mind directly to the quantum world.
And whether or not Orcoar specifically turns out to be right, it definitely throws open the door to thinking about quantum phenomena in relation to consciousness generally, doesn't it? Because when you start talking about quantum mechanics, I mean, you're talking about things that just completely defy our everyday common sense intuition. It often feels more like magic than science.
It absolutely does. Quantum mechanics describes how matter and energy behave down at the atomic and subatomic scale, and it's just a realm of profound strangeness. It forces us to abandon our classical pictures of reality.
So what are some key quantum phenomena that fuel these kinds of theories?
Well, two big ones that always come up are superposition and entanglement. Both are just deeply weird and challenge our basic assumptions.
Okay, superposition first. What's the gist?
Superposition is the idea that a quantum particle, like an electron, doesn't have definite properties until you measure them. Before you look, it can exist in multiple states simultaneously. It's not just here or there. It can be in a fuzzy combination of here and D there. It's not just spinning up OR down. It can be spinning up and D down at the same time.
Yeah. Like that famous thought experiment, Schrodinger's cat, being both alive and dead until you open the box.
Exactly like Schrodinger's cat, which was designed to show how absurd this idea seems when scaled up. But at the quantum level, superposition is experimentally verified again and again.
Yeah.
It's real. The particle exists in a wave of possibilities until something forces it to choose.
Okay, possibilities collapsing into reality. I can see how consciousness might sneak into that picture. But what about entanglement? That sounds even weirder.
Oh, it arguably is. Einstein famously disliked it, calling it spooky action at a distance.
Spooky action. Yeah, that captures it. My brain feels like it's doing spooky action, just trying to grasp it.
Uh-huh. I know the feeling. So entanglement describes how two or more particles can become linked in such a fundamental way that they essentially share the same existence, the same fate, no matter how far apart they get. They behave as a single system, even if one particle is here on Earth and the other is in the Andromeda galaxy.
How is that even possible?
That's the million-dollar question, but experiments confirm it. If you have two entangled particles, say, created together with opposite spins, and you measure the spin of one particle and find it's up, you instantly know with 100% certainty that the other particle, no matter how far away, will be measured as down.
Instantly. Faster than light.
It appears to be instantaneous. There's no signal traveling between them in the conventional sense. It's as if they are still connected, maintaining this correlation across vast distances. It challenges our fundamental ideas about locality, that things can only be influenced by their immediate surroundings.
Okay, superposition, entanglement. It's clear the quantum world operates by completely different rules. So how does the observer fit into all this weirdness?
The role of the observer. This is perhaps the most debated and philosophically loaded aspect of quantum mechanics. In the standard interpretation, often called the Copenhagen interpretation, it seems that the act of measurement, or observation, is what causes the quantum system to transition from that fuzzy state of superposition, that wave of possibilities, into a single definite reality.
So the particle is everywhere and nowhere, spinning both ways, until someone looks at it. And then it snaps into just one state.
That's the simplified way to put it, but yes, essentially. The measurement forces the wave function, that mathematical description of possibilities, to collapse into one specific outcome. Before the measurement, all outcomes are possible. After, only one is actual.
But what counts as a measurement or an observer? Does it have to be a conscious human, a cat, a Geiger counter?
That is the heart of the measurement problem. There's no consensus. Does the interaction with any macroscopic system count as a measurement? Or does consciousness play a unique role? This leads directly to that fundamental and deeply unsettling question. Could consciousness itself be the missing link? Could our minds be somehow intrinsically involved in collapsing the possibilities into reality?
If that were true, wow. That would mean observation isn't just passively recording what's already there.
Exactly. It suggests observation might be a fundamental interaction between mind and matter. It implies that consciousness isn't just a spectator in the universe, but maybe an active participant in shaping its reality, at least at the quantum level.
So consciousness isn't just something that happens in the universe, it's something the universe uses to become definite.
That's the radical implication some draw from the observer effect. It's a huge departure from the classical physics picture of a purely objective universe that exists independently of any observer, just ticking along whether we look or not. Quantum mechanics seems to hint at a more participatory reality.
Okay, so if consciousness does play this active role in collapsing quantum states, what does that mean for the universe observing itself? If we are part of the universe, and perhaps part of a larger cosmic consciousness, as we discussed earlier, then our acts of observation, our awareness, our science experiments, could that be the universe effectively becoming aware of its own quantum nature?
It creates this fascinating, almost paradoxical loop, doesn't it? If reality is fundamentally indeterminate until observed, and if consciousness is somehow key to observation, then the universe might be in this continuous process of self-definition, actualizing its own potential realities through the multitude of conscious observers it contains, including us.
Like a cosmic feedback mechanism. The universe generates observers, the observers collapse possibilities, defining the universe's state, which then allows for more observers.
It's a kind of self-observing, self-actualizing cosmos. Our very presence, our act of looking at the stars or probing quantum particles, could be interpreted as the universe itself bringing its fuzzy potentialities into concrete existence.
That's a mind-altering thought.
It is. Now, again, huge caveats. This is one interpretation of quantum mechanics. The role of consciousness is highly contested. Many physicists prefer interpretations, like many worlds or pilot wave theory, that try to avoid giving consciousness a special role. But the fact remains that quantum mechanics provides this intriguing, scientifically grounded backdrop where the clear line between observer and observed seems to blur, opening the door, at least philosophically, for consciousness to play a much more fundamental role in reality than classical physics ever allowed.
You know, listening to all this panpsychism, cosmic minds, quantum consciousness, it's really striking how these incredibly modern, cutting-edge, sometimes bizarre-sounding scientific and philosophical theories, how they often seem to echo ideas that have been around for, well, millennia in ancient wisdom traditions.
That's a really crucial point to bring in. This isn't an entirely new conversation, invented in physics labs or philosophy departments last week. The notion of a universal consciousness, or a shared, interconnected mind that underlies everything. It's deeply embedded in many ancient philosophical and spiritual traditions from all over the world, often reached without any of our modern scientific tools.
Like in Eastern philosophies.
Absolutely. Take Advaita Vedanta, for example, a major school of Hindu philosophy. It speaks of Brahman as the ultimate reality. Brahman isn't a personal god. It's described as this singular, infinite, unchanging, universal consciousness. It's the source, the substance, the very being of everything that exists.
An individual consciousness, our sense of self.
That's called Atman. And the core teaching of Advaita Vedanta is Tat Pham Asi, thou art that. Meaning your individual consciousness, your Atman, is ultimately identical with Brahman, the universal consciousness. There's no fundamental separation.
Wow. So my soul is the universal soul.
In essence, yes. It's a profound, non-dualistic perspective. And it's not just Hinduism. Buddhism, too, while very diverse and often non-theistic, it heavily emphasizes the interconnectedness and interdependence of all phenomena, Pratyasamutpada. Some schools, like Yogacara, talk about mind only, Siddha, suggesting that reality itself is fundamentally mental or experiential. Or the concept of Buddha nature, an inherent potential for awakening or awareness within all beings.
Suggesting reality is a manifestation of mind.
Or the mind awareness is fundamental. And then you have Taoism, especially in its more philosophical forms, with the concept of the Tao. The Tao is often described as this ineffable, underlying principle or order of the cosmos. It's the natural way, the source from which everything flows and to which everything returns. It implies an inherent intelligence, a self-organizing principle, maybe even a kind of consciousness at the very heart of the universe.
So these major traditions, through centuries, even millennia, of deep thought, introspection, meditation, they arrived at these insights about a fundamental shared consciousness.
It certainly seems that way. They use different language, different metaphors, different methods, often contemplative or introspective rather than empirical. But they converged on ideas that resonate remarkably strongly with some of these modern speculations like Panpsychism or cosmic consciousness.
And it's not just the big Easter philosophies, right? You mentioned other traditions too.
Definitely. Look at many indigenous cosmologies around the world. They often don't draw the sharp line that Western thought does between mind and matter, or between humans and nature. Many speak of the earth itself as a living being, the sky, rivers, mountains, animals, plants, all imbued with spirit, sentience, consciousness. They see the world not as a collection of inert resources for us to exploit,
but as a community of beings.
Exactly. A vast, interconnected family of conscious entities, each deserving respect. It's a perspective rooted in seeing awareness as widespread, not just locked inside human skulls. This leads to a very different relationship with the environment, one of stewardship and reciprocity.
That resonates powerfully today, obviously. And even within the Western tradition, which maybe became more dominated by materialism later on, weren't there similar ideas earlier?
Oh yes. Think of ancient Greek philosophy. Plato spoke of the world's soul, anima mundi. The Stoics believed the cosmos was pervaded by logos, a divine reason, an active organizing principle, almost like a universal mind governing fate and nature. Heraclitus also spoke of logos as an underlying order. And throughout Western history, you find mystical traditions, Neoplatonism, Hermeticism, various forms of Christian, Jewish, and Islamic mysticism exploring concepts of divine consciousness permeating all of reality, or the ultimate unity of the individual soul with a cosmic source.
So this idea of universal awareness isn't some weird new invention. It has deep roots across cultures and time periods.
Deep roots indeed. Which leads to a really fascinating question, doesn't it? Is it possible that contemporary scientific inquiry, with its super colliders, its brain scanners, its rigorous empirical methods, is it now maybe inadvertently circling back towards intuitions and insights that these ancient cultures held for so long?
Like science and ancient wisdom starting to converge on this point.
Potentially. Is it possible that the deepest truths about consciousness aren't confined just to our complex brains, but are actually woven into the very fabric of reality, just as these traditions suggested? It's a tantalizing possibility that different paths, the outward-looking path of empirical science and the inward-looking path of contemplative practice, might ultimately lead to similar, profound understandings about the nature of existence and awareness. This cross-cultural, cross-temporal resonance is really something to ponder.
It really is. Okay, but as captivating and frankly beautiful as some of these ideas are, the interconnectedness, the echoes of ancient wisdom, we do have to pull ourselves back to earth, or at least back to the lab bench. We need to ground this discussion in the current prevailing scientific landscape.
Absolutely crucial. Because let's be very clear, while these ideas, panpsychism, quantum consciousness, cosmic mind, are incredibly thought-provoking, intellectually stimulating, maybe even inspiring, it is vital to acknowledge that they remain largely on the fringes of mainstream scientific consensus.
So most scientists are not buying into this stuff right now.
The vast majority are not, no. The prevailing view among most researchers in neuroscience, in physics, in biology, even in much of philosophy of mind, is that these ideas are highly speculative. Some would go further and label them as pseudoscientific, or at least not currently within the realm of testable science.
And what's the main reason for that skepticism? What's the big pushback?
The primary criticism, and it's a really significant one if you value the scientific method, is the profound lack currently, at least, of concrete empirical evidence. There's no experiment that definitively shows an electron feels something. We have no measurement that detects proto-consciousness in fundamental particles. We have no telescope that can observe the mind of the universe.
So no data.
Essentially, yes. We can observe the physical behavior of particles, stars, galaxies, brains. We can build mathematical models. But we have no direct way to measure or detect the subjective experience that panpsychism posits in simple matter, or the overarching awareness of a cosmic mind. It remains largely a conceptual framework, a philosophical interpretation, rather than a scientific theory that makes specific, testable predictions that differ from standard physics or neuroscience.
And that brings us right to the core challenge, doesn't it? The massive hurdle for these theories within science: testability.
Exactly. Science, at its heart, relies on hypotheses that can be tested against observation and experiment. Ideally, hypotheses should be falsifiable. There should be some conceivable observation that could prove them wrong.
If you can't test it, you can't potentially break it. And if you can't break it, it's hard to trust it scientifically.
Precisely. And if you can't design an experiment to gather evidence that could either support or refute the idea, it becomes very difficult for it to gain traction as a scientific explanation, no matter how philosophically appealing or elegant it might seem. This is a challenge faced by other highly theoretical areas too, like certain aspects of string theory, for example. Their mathematical beauty is undeniable. But if they don't make unique, testable predictions in the foreseeable future, they risk remaining outside the core of empirical science.
So how does this testability problem play out specifically for panpsychism or cosmic consciousness?
Well, the challenge is just immense, maybe even insurmountable with anything resembling our current technology or conceptual frameworks. How do you design an experiment to empirically verify that a quark or a photon or even a rock possesses some form of subjective experience?
Right, a proton can't fill out a questionnaire about its feelings.
Exactly. It can't tell us if it experiences anything. A star, magnificent as it is, can't respond to our questions about its inner awareness, assuming it even had any. We can observe all their physical properties: mass, charge, spin, light emission, gravitational effects. But we currently have no conceivable consciousness meter that could detect a primitive form of subjective awareness in supposedly inert matter or across the cosmos.
So without a way to test it, it remains philosophy, speculation.
Largely, yes. This untestability, this lack of concrete, predictable consequences that differ from standard physics, makes validation exceptionally difficult. It keeps these ideas mostly in the realm of philosophical debate rather than empirical science. For a concept to really make the leap, it needs to generate novel, testable predictions. If panpsychism is true, we should observe X, which standard physics wouldn't predict. Currently, those kinds of unique, testable predictions are largely missing.
Okay, so it's fair to say these are fascinating, mind-expanding ideas, offering potentially profound new ways to think about reality. But they currently lack the empirical grounding, the testability that mainstream science rightly demands.
That's a very fair summary of the current situation.
However, even among the staunchest skeptics, the people who completely dismiss panpsychism or quantum consciousness, there's still that one crucial area of agreement, isn't there? That elephant in the room, the hard problem of consciousness, is still genuinely, profoundly difficult. Nobody's really claiming to have solved that.
That is the critical common ground. That's the mystery that unites almost everyone working in this field, regardless of their preferred solution or lack thereof. Even the most hard-nosed materialist scientists who are convinced consciousness must be explainable purely by physical brain processes will readily acknowledge that we don't yet have that explanation. The explanatory gap remains.
They acknowledge the enigma.
Absolutely. We have increasingly sophisticated models of brain function, information processing, neural networks, complex systems giving rise to emergent properties. But why any of that complex physical activity should generate a subjective, qualitative, what it's like, feeling that inner light of awareness remains stubbornly elusive. It's still the ultimate why question in the science of mind.
And maybe it's precisely that difficulty, that persistent gap that deepens the mystery. Maybe that's what necessitates exploring these more radical out there ideas.
I think that's exactly right. If our conventional approaches, working solely within the standard framework of physics and neuroscience, aren't cracking the code, if we keep hitting this conceptual wall when trying to explain subjective experience from purely objective, non-experiential components, then perhaps we need to be open to considering entirely different paradigms, even if those paradigms initially seem unconventional, counterintuitive, or, as you said earlier, almost mystical sounding.
Because the history of science is full of breakthroughs that came from challenging fundamental assumptions, right?
Absolutely. Think about it. A sun-centered solar system seemed absurd once. General relativity's curved space-time was revolutionary. Quantum mechanics itself was deeply weird and resisted by many initially. Major progress often requires questioning the very foundations. So when faced with a problem as fundamental and resistant as consciousness, perhaps an uncomfortable openness to explore beyond our current conceptual boundaries is not just warranted, but necessary.
While still demanding rigor and evidence wherever possible, of course.
Of course, it's not about abandoning science, but potentially expanding its conceptual toolkit, or at least being willing to entertain fundamentally different starting points if the old ones aren't working for this particular, uniquely hard problem. The sheer difficulty might be telling us something profound about our current picture of reality.
Okay, so let's try to weave this all together as we approach the end of this deep dive. Let's bring it back to that initial, huge, mind-bending question we started with. Is the universe conscious?
The big one.
After exploring panpsychism, the quantum links, the echoes in ancient wisdom, but also acknowledging the very real scientific skepticism and the testability problem, it really feels like striving for a definitive yes or no might be, well, maybe impossible right now, and perhaps it's even the wrong way to frame the question entirely.
I tend to agree. Forcing a binary answer, yes or no, onto something potentially so complex and nuanced might just limit our understanding before we even begin. It's like asking if a complex ecosystem is alive. Yes, in a sense, but that simple label misses the intricate web of interactions and dependencies that define it. Maybe consciousness in the universe is similarly complex.
So if is the universe conscious is maybe the wrong question, or at least an unanswerable one for now. Is there a better question we could be asking, a more productive one?
Well, perhaps a more profound, more insightful question, one that really shifts our perspective and maybe deepens our sense of connection, is something like, are we the way the universe becomes conscious of itself?
Ah, okay, that lands differently.
No.
Are we the way the universe becomes conscious of itself?
It's not just playing with words. It fundamentally reframes our relationship to the cosmos. It moves us away from seeing consciousness as something alien to the universe that somehow popped up in it, and towards seeing consciousness, specifically our consciousness, as something the universe does, an activity of the cosmos itself.
That resonates strongly with that famous, beautiful quote from Carl Sagan, doesn't it? We are a way for the cosmos to know itself.
Exactly. Sagan captured it perfectly. And that's not just a poetic sentiment. It carries this deep philosophical weight and perhaps even a hint of scientific truth that goes way beyond our usual human-centric view.
So the implication is, our minds, our awareness, they aren't these separate little bubbles floating in isolation, distinct from the vastness out there.
No. Instead, they are an inherent part of it all, a continuation of the universe's own processes. Maybe even its most intricate, reflective, self-aware expression, at least that we know of. Our consciousness isn't just in the universe. Maybe it is the universe, experiencing itself in this particular, localized, highly complex form.
If you think about cosmic evolution, from the Big Bang, fundamental particles, atoms, molecules, stars, planets, then complex chemistry, life.
And eventually, nervous systems, brains, and self-aware consciousness like ours.
Then maybe the emergence of beings like us, capable of observing, questioning, understanding. Maybe that's a natural, perhaps even inevitable stage in the universe's own grand unfolding story, its own development.
It could be seen that way. Our ability to gaze at the stars and figure out the laws of physics, our capacity to feel awe and wonder at the sheer scale and beauty of the cosmos, our drive to ask these very questions about consciousness and reality. From this perspective, these aren't just individual human activities. They are the universe itself, engaging in this incredible process of self-reflection, self-discovery, self-understanding through us.
We are the instruments.
The conduits, perhaps.
Through which the universe perceives its own existence, its own majesty, its own mysteries.
It flips the script entirely. We are not alienated observers. We are the universe's sense organs, its nerve endings, maybe even parts of its developing mind.
And so, just maybe, in every thought you, listening right now, have, in every moment of wonder you feel looking up at the night sky, in every single question you ask about existence, big or small, perhaps the universe itself is engaged in this profound, ongoing process of reflection and awakening right here, through you.
It suggests we're not just in the universe. We are, in a very real and active sense, the universe becoming aware. Our consciousness, however limited or fleeting it might seem against cosmic time, is like a mirror in which the cosmos can glimpse itself.
That is a profoundly humbling but also incredibly inspiring thought to end on. That our individual awareness isn't isolated, but might be this tiny yet vital facet of a much larger cosmic awareness.
It certainly invites us to see our minds not as separate from the stars, galaxies, and quantum foam, but as intimately connected, perhaps carrying a spark of that universal nature within us.
Yeah.
It redefines our place.
From just passive observers, maybe even accidental bystanders,
To active participants, maybe even co-creators of meaning and understanding within this grand unfolding cosmic story.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this truly mind-bending deep dive into one of humanity's absolute deepest questions. We really hope this exploration has stirred your imagination, maybe challenged some assumptions, and opened your mind to new possibilities about the nature of reality and, indeed, your own place within it. If this deep dive resonated with you, please do consider subscribing and maybe sharing the Space and Astronomy podcast with your other cosmic curious friends.
And join us next time, where we promise to explore another cosmic mystery, one that again blurs those fascinating lines between cutting-edge science and timeless philosophy, pushing the boundaries of what we think we know.
Until then, keep questioning, keep exploring that sense of wonder, and remember this final thought to ponder, perhaps as you look up at the sky tonight. The universe is not just out there, it's also in here.